So our job is, on the one hand, or my job on the one hand, is try to work with experimentalists in order to build a mapping, I think, from data to understanding in a very collaborative way, to try to transform the theories that experimental biologists have designed into quantitative theories that we can work together to test. And then in terms of working with scientists of other types, so pure mathematicians have created astonishingly rich descriptions of the world of possibilities, the logical world of possibilities, and oftentimes those types of mathematical and logical constructs can help us understand the sciences, but there's a bridge that's needed into formalisms that are a little bit more concrete. And I relish the opportunity to talk with pure mathematicians as well, to do my best to try to understand their work and their ideas, and to translate that into concepts that might be able to help us better inform the brain. So I guess I'm just kind of a bridge. How about discovering something new, like a totally new concept that might not have been out there before? Mathematical modeling can enable us to explore the realm of possibilities, constrained by only what we know about, for example, the way neural networks in the brain might be configured, and come up with ideas that we, I think, did not have anywhere in our intuition or in our conceptual landscape before. My favorite example there is high dimensional chaos. So what on earth is that? We've all heard about the butterfly effect, right, where a butterfly flaps its wings in Singapore, and that makes it rain a week later in Seattle, or for a more shocking sensation, makes the sun come out a week later in Seattle. Fine. Okay, so that's unpredictability. We also know that very complex and interconnected systems tend to be chaotic, and we know that the brain is a complex and interconnected system, so we might think that it's chaotic. And there have been a number of studies over the years that suggest that it is. A ripple, a butterfly wing somewhere, will indeed propagate to produce a large fluctuation or a large disturbance in activity patterns downstream. The question, how come then we're not just completely randomly performing chaotic messes in terms of the behavior that we produce? And it turns out that if you look at the type of chaotic activity patterns that seem to be produced in large neural networks, they have this amazing split structure in which, in most ways, they are actually completely regular and predictable, but in just a few of the directions or dimensions of possibility, they are unpredictable and irregular. And that structure is, I think, not something that we would have just walked around and thought about without mathematical models, without mathematical theory, a source of concepts for which we can later build intuition and later build tests, but for which we would never have without the type of abstracted and artificial, yet I think useful worlds that mathematics creates. So I think, as you know, the history of neuroscience has proceeded in two branches, one of which is observing huge numbers of cells or huge populations of cells, but with relatively low spatial or temporal resolution, or both. So a classic example of that would be EEG recordings, which have been hugely important and do observe global brain signals, but those global brain signals are not resolved at the level of single neurons. And then there's also been single neuron neuroscience, which began with the recording of one or several neurons at once, and as you know, over the last decades has exploded to this the state that we find ourselves at today, where hundreds, if not thousands, of single units can be recorded simultaneously. And this is what is called population level recording, or population systems neuroscience. So the question of population coding in neuroscience is perhaps well stated as, or well described as, is this whole more than the sum of the parts? Is what I'm seeing when I look at 400 neurons at the same time, or 4,000 neurons at the same time, more or less the same as I would have seen if I was a very patient scientist and I accumulated 10 at a time or one at a time, these 4,000 units of activity, finally made the plot, finally revealed the tapestry of their activity patterns when I looked at them separately. Well, it seems like it would be the same thing, right? Just take a picture of one pixel at a time or take a picture of all the pixels at the same time, put them together. It's just a matter of time, right? Maybe not actually, because maybe that first pixel changed what it was doing in the time that it took for you to measure what was happening in the second pixel. And maybe you never see a complete picture of what is actually happening unless you take that picture simultaneously. Sort of like trying to take a picture of a geyser going off in Yellowstone, right? If you take that one pixel at a time and then reassemble it, you're going to get a blur. But if you image the whole thing on pixel level simultaneously, you'll actually be able to see Old Faithful. So the question is, what is it? Is it more of a static system that you can actually characterize one unit at a time, or is there something different when you simultaneously see what's happening in the brain as a whole? Nobody knew until the last 5 or 10 years ago. But I think that there's quite a convincing picture emerging that it is like the geyser. In other words, there is coordinated activity that is happening on a moment by moment basis across the brain, which is different from that which you could ever guess by looking just at the parts separately and trying to sum them together, trying to guess how they're assembled together over time. And so what I've seen is two trends. And the first is that mechanistic theories, what we might call dynamical theories, like that idea of a memory attractor, let's call those dynamic or mechanistic theories. Those are describing more and more types of computations. You could imagine another theory of a computation, which is an algorithm, right? Like you might have in pseudocode for computer science or in a deep algorithms class. Anyway, that is not mechanistic, and that is not dynamic. That's not really geometrical. That's not really possible to visualize. It might be way more powerful than all of the above. That's not meant to be pejorative, but it's something different, and it's studied with a different type of mathematics. And it's not really a physical type of mathematics either. Physical, mechanistic, dynamic, and geometrical mathematics is now coming to computation with many more examples than the one that I just described. And I think that is a really emerging and exciting theoretical trend. The other piece, I think it would be disingenuous for me to say that this is a new trend, the linkage between artificial and biological networks, because this linkage was always there, but they were not as in the mainstream in terms of cellular and even molecular neuroscience as they are now. And I think there's a deep belief now, which I believe is well-founded, that it will be useful to think about molecular, cellular, and systems neuroscience and population level cell resolution recordings as well, through the perspective of learning, through the perspective of systems that can be reasonably approximated by artificial intelligence networks, and that we'll better understand not just in broad brushstrokes behavior, but actually the implementation of that behavior by looking at learning as simulated in artificial systems and comparing the results with what we see as observed and recorded and perhaps perturbed in biological systems. So I think there's a deepening of that connection, which is new over the last 10 years. So the two areas I think that we've identified as levers, which can broaden the appeal and participation in theoretical neuroscience within the computational neuroscience centers, are looking at how and when people are able to experience what it really is like to be a scientist in this field and realize that we're just a bunch of people like each other who can exist in a very human and supportive and encouraging world. We're partnering with the undergraduate research program to be one of the early centers who will hopefully, if it receives further university support, we put our money where our mouth is behind this as well, with seed funds to fund a new early scholars program. But this would target people in their first or second year, so they're not even sure if they want to do STEM, obviously with a specific focus as well on those who may not have had as extensive an exposure to scientific research in the past, or to scientific communities based on their background, or to people who may look like them who are doing science as well. So we hope to meet early on individuals who have the same natural interest in science and mathematics as those who are already doing the science and mathematics, and let them know through their own contributions, which they're ready to make, that this is incredibly fun, and this is incredibly welcoming, and this is simply incredibly possible, because we're all just making small steps based on what we read and what we guess, and what we are very gradually learning and studying.